Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
You're tuned into another episode of The Business Side of Music. Joining us today, all the way from East London, England, is Napper Tandy. He is the CEO and founder of a company called One House, which when I was talking to your publicist and Kian was describing a little bit about what it is you guys do, you have really created a different form of an entity from, I guess, what we would call the usual management or artist development company.
That's exactly right, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome to the show. So let's talk about how One House management got started. What was your drive to make something like this happen?
So I suppose it all starts, Bob, with me growing up in London as a big fan of electronic music through my teenage years. I went to university, in a town called Cambridge in the UK. And it's a small university town. And there were only kind of 3 clubs playing chart music. And I wanted to hear music that I liked on a sound system, not just in our bedrooms. So we set up parties, as lots of other people did while they were at university. And while I was a student, it kind of snowballed, and I had thousands of people showing up to these tiny venues, listening to Detroit, Chicago, New York legends and DJ legends from across Europe. And that was where the fire was lit in terms of me thinking, oh, this is more than just a hobby or a passion. Like, this is actually something that I could pursue. So I graduated from university with a kind of functioning business, running events around Europe and booking lots of talent for student balls in the UK. And I set One House up wanting to work with the artists, not just sell the tickets. A few months after leaving university, had no idea what I was doing. Set up as a management company and live agency. And those first 2 years, Bob, were really just traveling around the world, building network, learning, having some early successes with some artists. And it was really over that time period, Bob, of being properly immersed in the music industry, that we arrived at a set of observations about things that we felt were being done wrong, and ultimately how we could be part of fixing it. So that period of time is where we kind of learned those lessons, formed those observations, and where One House as it exists today was born.
Let's go back a little bit further. Growing up as a kid and in school and in college, were you a musician, or did you have an interest of working in the music business?
So the music business definitely wasn't something that was on my radar, not in a meaningful way at that point. I was a aspiring DJ, loved going out to those kinds of electronic music events, having totally formative experiences in my teenage years, absolutely passionate, both about these sort of subculture sounds that were bubbling up through London, like dubstep and other things, and other kind of musical strands. I played some instruments terribly as a child, so I don't think I can really claim any meaningful footprint there. But certainly as a teenager and then at university and shortly afterwards, I was obsessed with DJing, did a lot of DJing across my own events and festivals around Europe. So there was a time where I was doing the thing in front of an audience as well as running my events. And as the business side of what I was doing started to develop, it kind of became a natural crossroads where I needed to focus myself down into that, and kind of naturally ended up doing less and less of the DJing myself.
When you talk about being a DJ for clubs and other public events, that traditionally doesn't translate very well into artist management. And on the other hand, artist management is a very definitive hat, for lack of better words, to wear in the music industry. And I always say this a lot to people that ask me how to get into the business. Going to college, going to university is a good way to get some book smarts, but the street smart aspect of it is an entirely different thing. How did you start to figure out how artist management worked?
It's a really interesting question you posed, Bob, because we'll probably get onto it more a bit later when we unpack some of the things that we're doing at One House. But I think one of the things you've uncovered there is that there is a real, even to this day, an extraordinary lack of on-ramps into the industry for aspiring young professionals, aspiring young creatives. It's still this kind of black box system where if you want to learn how to get involved, I think it's still incredibly hard to find a path through it all. And that's definitely one of the things that we're trying to solve. I mean, in terms of the going through it and learning the street smarts of it all, I think that one of the benefits of the world that I came from, there are downsides and benefits to all of these things, is I came through whatever you want to call it, underground dance music, underground electronic music. And those communities are relatively small. Certainly 10 years or so ago when I was in the middle of it as a kind of young promoter, these are sufficiently small communities environments that there is a revolving door between the different roles. There is a kind of independence laid over everything. The idea that there's huge structures like major labels with huge divisions between other companies just wasn't really the reality in those environments. So we were operating in a world where naturally everyone was wearing lots of hats, where the kind of permeable membrane between the different roles meant that you could absorb all of these different skills and play different roles and kind of amateur artist management responsibilities at that time, where I was starting to kind of cut my teeth in other parts of it. I also think it's the case that in electronic, again, certainly then even more than now, the industry is so driven by live performance. So being in the center of the action within the live performance component, as I was as a promoter, you're really in the engine room of how value's being created and how audience is being built for those artists. So you're really close to the center of the action. And that meant that as I emerged into doing the kind of representative piece and into the management role, I'd perhaps absorbed a lot of the key pillars of how people were building careers in the space that we were operating in.
When you started One House as this management company, your mission statement, what really separated you from other companies? What makes you different?
I think to snap back to that time, leaving university, Bob, and what was like driving then, the first thing is, I think, the thing that a lot of people experience at that age that are going through some version of running events in a similar way is just dissatisfaction with the way that the like traditional live industry operates in terms of traditional live agents or service, like difficult interactions, like you're trying to build culture and do something for passion and you're dealing with people that are really economically incentivized. And there's always that natural tension there. Combine that with a bit of kind of young ambition and a conclusion that there's a better way of doing things. So definitely an aspirational goal of producing a company that was more deeply rooted in culture, in outcomes for artists, in outcomes for the community above and beyond just economic outcomes. So that was one of the things. And I think the other thing, for us at that time when we set up as a management company and a live agency, it was still seen, I mean, it frankly is still today to a certain extent, seen as very disruptive and against the status quo to build a business that delivered on both of those verticals. And I think what led us to the name One House and what was really a sort of set of feelings then, which has become a very robust mission subsequently, is that there was surely a way to simplify the development architecture of the industry, simplify the development pathway for artists, simplify the commercial system that it all operates inside, to produce better outcomes for artists and their teams. And I think I kind of understood that then in a broad way. And actually the 3-4 years that followed that were taking that from a set of intuitive assumptions into a mission plan, which is the business as it exists today.
I like what you said, and that is the disruption of the status quo, the disruption of the traditional music industry template. It's always kind of been real cookie cutter. This is the way we do it for the past 6 or 7 decades, and nothing's going to change. But I think with the advent of, first of all, downloading that we had in the early 2000s and now the streamings, that business model you can almost throw out in the trash and start from ground zero. Is that kind of been your mindset?
I think that's absolutely right, Bob. I mean, look, I think management agreements, recorded music agreements, you say 6-7 decades. I mean, since the late 1800s, a recorded music agreement, is relatively unchanged, right? The amount of stasis around the kind of legal infrastructure with which the industry happens is extraordinary. There's a number of reasons for that. But to take, for example, a recorded music agreement, a lot of major label agreements, they look the same as they did 100 years ago. We're talking about a contract that used to govern a relationship where you had to print thousands of tons of plastic, ship it all around the world to individual local offices, marketing teams, distributor teams all around the world in order to release a record globally. We now have an environment where you press a click on a computer and you have the same function delivered, but the underlying commercial agreements look much the same. And it's obviously ridiculous to any external observer. So I think you're absolutely right. Like, we saw the facts on the ground in all sorts of areas of the industry suggested a world that barely, held anything in common with the world in which these contracts were created. But we saw an industry that was doing nothing to adapt itself to that new reality, and that there must be a space for people to be asking more questions if the box called artist management and the box called record label are still the boxes that we should be automatically obligating ourselves to operate inside, or whether actually we should be thinking about some new boxes. And that's, I think, that, very much the way that we approached our work.
We're going to take a break, get a word in for one of our sponsors, or a couple of our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Napper Tandy, who is the founder and CEO of One House.
Hi, this is Bob Burial Safaris of Wipeout fame. You're on the Business Side of Music show.
You're listening to the business side of music.
As a musician, you have a dream, that vision of what success looks like for you. Though it's not only about the money, money is part of it. Whether you've been extremely successful or you're just striving to maintain a regular cash flow, you need a plan. Money Concepts can help you develop a customized plan to achieve the financial stability and success you want. For over 40 years, Money Concepts has been providing holistic financial planning services to individuals, families, and business owners. As an independent firm, Money Concepts and their associates are committed to always represent the best interest of the client. It's really about a committed, benevolent interest in them personally. This independence, coupled with that committed, benevolent interest, means they represent you, the client, not a product supplier. It's not about selling products, it's about helping you achieve success. To learn how this can benefit you, contact my buddy, John Adams, with Money Concepts at 737-867-9309. That's 737-867-9309. You can also email John at jadams@moneyconcepts.com.
Hey, this is Jack Sharkey, host of Between the Notes. Take a break from all the turmoil in the world and join us each week as we explore the magic, mystery, and beauty of music. Between the Notes, a podcast dedicated to everything music, available everywhere you get your podcasts.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back on the show all the way from East London, England, is Napper Tandy, who is the founder and CEO of One House, which is a very different and unique management company. But you're a little bit more than that when we delve into what your company is all about. When you go out and you find artists or artists find you, what is really that criteria that you're looking for to represent them? And then once that's in place, what is that hat that you wear to help them with their tools and their resources in their career?
So I think in terms of the sorts of people that we're looking to work with, Bob, I think from a cultural and artistic perspective, we're looking for people that have something really important to say, something, that a differentiated voice, artistically ambitious, not necessarily following the status quo, but, adding something substantively to culture. And we've got a great track record of artists that have really moved the dial on new sounds, new cultural movements, even political contributions. And I think that's a really core part of the kind of characteristics that can connect a lot of artist community to each other. And from a business perspective, or from the other side of whatever this whole artistic practice thing that we're discussing is, We want people that are independently minded, want to build out a structure that is something that they've designed that maps onto how they want to run their lives and their careers, rather than being handed something from the traditional industry, which is sort of obligated onto them, as we've discussed. And so those sorts of people that want to carve their own pathway through it, that are interested in building something that they own, we've built the answer for those people. So those are often the best fits. And I think the kind of zoom out is that what we found, that I think we're all experiencing in the industry, is that the kind of zeitgeist and the appetite from a new generation of creatives is far more pointed towards this kind of independent entrepreneurial pathway than to the traditional industry, where frankly artists are positioned as product rather than as the kind of founders and CEOs of their own business, which is what we want them to be.
When we talk about management and we talk about record labels, there's always been a certain amount of influence, that aspect in trying to help the artist guide their careers, sometimes overtaking their careers and saying, this is what you need to do, and this is how you need to do it. Do you take more of a, I don't want to say hands-off approach, but do you allow those creative juices from the artist perspective, from their angle, to take a bigger role in their career? Or do you still create a certain amount of an imprint that you hope they'll follow?
So the simple answer is that we're absolutely creating a platform and an environment that empowers artists to kind of pursue their own journey and communicate their own voice, regardless of what you think about that universe of kind of a more manufactured or a more kind of interventionist approach to the artist's creativity. It doesn't work anymore. You know, the days where major label teams or artist development teams could come in and kind of build out a proposition for an artist and ask them to kind of perform that proposition, it doesn't work anymore. You know, audiences decide what works. The ability for kind of industry brains to predict at a very early stage what's going to connect and what isn't has almost completely disappeared. So I think that any kind of remaining companies that feel that they can very proactively shape the meat on the bones of a project are kidding themselves. No one can do that anymore. So our job is to create a platform for exceptional creatives to develop that creativity, to advise, to contribute, to collaborate, but ultimately to create the space and the resource for them to develop their own practice.
One of the things that One House brings to the table that I noticed in the notes that I received is you have a creative division. Can we dig into that a little deeper?
Yeah, so I might just zoom out for a second, Bob, and just say give you a quick overview of the business to just make sense of it. So to talk about the artist piece first, one of the core hypotheses of the company is that this kind of historical division between services businesses like Hollywood agencies and management companies and intellectual property businesses like labels, production companies, doesn't necessarily make sense in a modern world. So our music division, our artist division, has live agency services, management services, label services, intellectual property pipes. We put artists in the middle of that, like a kind of modular set of resources that they can plug into as they want. We give them development capital and we allow them to kind of build out their projects in one environment with vastly improved economics, greater ownership, and in a setup that looks something more like a venture studio than a conventional label, right? We want to give them the resources, the tools, and the money that they need to build businesses that they own, not interrelate with 10 different companies and sell away all of their stuff in receipt of a royalty. So that's our artist piece. The creative studio is the second pillar, which we've just spoken about. So we've been working with global brands, everyone from Amazon to fashion brands to music tech brands and on to create, exciting marketing collaborations between artists, creative IP, and global consumer brands. And we've formalized that as its own creative studio because it was just picking up its own pace. So we were really happy to announce that in the last few weeks. And we're really excited with some very large global collaborative projects we've got coming on the pipe. We think that brands have only a constantly increasing role to play in providing resource and distribution to kind of music industry. And the third pillar, which I'm sure we'll get onto, Bob, I mentioned it while we're here, is where we build our own software layers that supercharge all these processes and built a unique set of tools, which we're now taking out to the rest of the industry to kind of give them access to the same toolkits that supercharge the growth that we've enjoyed over the last couple of years.
Do you seek out the artists to come under your umbrella, or do they come to you, or is it a little bit of both?
It's definitely both, Bob. I mean, obviously, when we were starting out, we were knocking on doors, begging and pleading, for anyone to work with us back right at the start of our journey. And that's the way in. We've built a brand, I think, that has, received a lot of recognition for playing an important role in certain sounds and certain scenes in certainly electronic music and increasingly in other genres. So as that's been built out, last year we had a #1 record in lots of territories around the world, and a number of nominations across the Mobos and the Brits and other award categories like that. So we find increasingly that we have a lot of really exciting, really high quality inbound artists and artist managers that want to work with us, which is super exciting. As we grow out the business, software ecosystem, our media ecosystem, this increasingly large community that we're building out, hopefully offers an environment, a really rich environment for an increasingly large number of artists to exist in some capacity, Bob. And once artists are in our community, there's always the optionality for us to develop a deep working relationship with those people. So we're trying to build this world that has all of these tools and resources inside, and then have all of this kind of base for us to deepen our relationships with the most exciting artists that we're working with.
So 2 questions before we take another break. Is the first one, is there a specific genre of music that you like to work with more than another? You have mentioned electronic dance music quite a bit. Do you limit yourselves to just that, or do you look for more genres? And then the other question is are you looking for artists that are UK-based or Europe-based, or do you look on a global level?
We, in terms of the genre question, Bob, our background, we all came from electronic music. So that's sort of where the company built density when we were starting out. We still have a really strong position in the global electronic music market. So that's definitely a big slice of what we do. But we really see ourselves and the future of the business as a kind of genreless business. We want to work with extraordinary artists that we're passionate about across a wide range of cultural areas and sonic areas. And that maps onto all of our personal taste, but also maps onto what we're trying to do, which is solve problems at scale in the music industry. And that means, thinking about the entire picture. The second question was, do we do geography? Yeah. So our headquarters is in the UK, Bob. We have 50, 60, 70 live shows every single weekend of the year in 50, 60, 70 different cities and towns all around the world. So the footprint of the business is truly global in terms of where our artists are going to perform. And the artists that we represent are from the UK, all across Europe, Australia, America, South America, West Africa, India, Japan. So we have a very, very global footprint, both in terms of the artists that we work with and in terms of the kind of distribution framework of where that music goes. Of course, there's probably like a slight density in the UK, in Europe, where we have like physical presence. But I think we ultimately see ourselves as a global business, and increasingly the footprint of the business reflects that.
We're going to take another break, get another word in for a couple more of our sponsors for the business side of music. When we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Napper Tandy, who is the CEO and founder of One House.
Hi, this is Vale Johnson, bass player for myself, and you're listening to the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Whether you consider yourself a musician or not, music is all around us, and it affects our everyday lives. Whether it's background music influencing our shopping habits in a store, organ music adding the vibe to a baseball game, or a playlist convincing us to keep going on that last mile of a run. I'm Mindy Peterson, host of the podcast Enhance Life with Music, where we take a holistic look at music's benefits through the lens of science and medicine, entertainment, and business. You can find me and Enhance Life with Music at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast or wherever you get your audio.
When you have a Korg synth at your fingertips, the possibilities are endless. Be it digital, analog modeling, altered FM, wave sequencing, or the multi-engine synth, Korg gives you easy access to a variety of features to help you get the perfect sounds quickly. Whether you're a professional musician or just starting out, Korg truly has a synthesizer to help you express yourself. Visit Korg.com or your favorite Korg dealer to get your hands on one of their products to create new music always. Korg, the official sponsor of the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio, all the way from East London, England, is Tandy, who is the founder and CEO of One House. As you have developed this company, as you have built it, what are the plans for the future? What do you see a year from now, 5 years from now, etc.?
It's a great question. I mean, I think, well, there's a few things. I think the first is that we see a universe of increasingly independent entrepreneurial realities for artists and other kinds of creative talent, where the structures that your Beyoncé and your Will Smiths have enjoyed, which basically looks like Artist Incorporated, right, is a dedicated team, dedicated corporate structure. We see a version of that reality becoming the reality and being made available to a larger population of artists at the top of the music industry, not just the 0.0001%. Those businesses look like artist ecosystems with intellectual property ownership embedded within them. And we see the kind of model that we built as really helping to facilitate that reality for a much bigger population of artists. And as the dominoes start to fall, this becomes increasingly the, preferred, most in-demand reality for what most artists want to pursue who are entering the industry or building careers in the industry. And we're super excited about that, super excited to be part of that revolution. I think the sort of second piece is that in that new universe with increasingly independent pathways for artists, we think that the music industry and the wider creative industries is changing. And I think these changes are already being reflected, where you have a kind of increasingly atomized or increasingly individual constellation of small artist management companies, small label practices, small artist development practices that are able, through technology and through media, scale their businesses up to multi-$10 million, multi-$100 million valuations without necessarily selling away their IP to major labels, without selling away portions of their businesses to larger companies. And to do that, these hundreds, thousands of businesses that are looking for themselves a new pathway to support this independent, hybridized services and IP universe need a new toolkit layer to plug into. And what we're doing with our platform at One House is we're taking the tools that we've built internally, which is a kind of integrated workspace with services, intellectual property pipes, financial management, analytics, all in one environment. And they'll be plugging into that platform to facilitate these pathways for their businesses. So in simple terms, what we're trying to do in parallel to creating this alternative pathway for artists is build out the infrastructure layer that facilitates that new system for a whole new generation of creative businesses.
When we talk about that whole new generation, one of the things that we look at so differently now, and I mentioned this in the very beginning, is, how we delivered music in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s. And then that business model changed. And then when in the last few years, that has changed even again in the delivery system of music. Do you see, from your perspective of streaming being the kind of the status quo for a while? I know that we're seeing a resurgence of vinyl, and even to a certain extent CDs and cassettes, although nothing like it ever used to be. But that delivery platform to get music out, where do you see that going?
I think that the streaming model will be adapted and innovated in an attempt to answer some of the concerns and queries that people have about the economic model. I think the principle is here to stay. I think that, people are sometimes quick to forget the absolute doldrums that the streaming model rescued the industry from. And it has produced a robust, sustainable monetization framework for allowing people to earn money from recorded music again. So I don't think streaming is going anywhere, and I don't personally see it being replaced by another alternative primary system of purchasing or listening to music. What I do think is that we're increasingly moving towards an environment where, if you look at an artist business, the revenue sources are broken down into more and more even slices of different kinds of revenue. So whereas, in other areas of the music industry, revenue might have been dominated by live or dominated by records at different periods, I think we're now seeing the proliferation of different ways to monetize and leverage IP, different ways to monetize audience and those relationships with your fans through so many different methodologies. And I think managing an artist business well in 2023 and beyond is about tending to all of those different areas at the same time. And I think that's challenging, but very, very exciting when you get it right. The only last thing that I'll say is that I think that my personal view is that with the arrival of the big digital platforms, your Netflixes, your Spotifys, it's like what we'd say in the UK is a supermarket. It's like a big mall, right? Moving into our Walmart, coming into our, it's convenient. They have everything that you want. It's not a particularly personalized experience, but it's super, super convenient, available, abundant for you to access everything that you need. What's happened in a lot of these regions, if you look at food as an example, is that people still buy from those stores, but people have supplemented their patronage of those very, very large supermarkets or malls with their local deli, with going and spending more for some fancy cheese or some fancy meats, and people get a lot of enjoyment over those more personalized, more highly curated experiences, not instead of, as well as a relationship with those bigger marketplaces. And I think what we're starting to see in video, and I think exists in music and we'll probably see proliferate, is these smaller cultural niches with their own direct-to-consumer distribution channels and sales channels that don't replace people's Spotify subscription, but supplement it, so that actually people will add a subscription or add a regular payment to their favorite community ecosystem in addition to their Spotify subscription. I think that as an industry, people are still working out, how to make those worthwhile, those sort of parallel offerings. But I think we're getting there. And I think that consumer habits broadly suggest that there's an appetite for people kind of supplementing those subscriptions to the big DSPs.
An aspiring artist, that independent creator wants to connect with one house. How do they go about doing that? So
there's lots of ways to connect with us. I mean, we encourage, anyone that is doing this whole music thing, whether they're an aspiring creative professional or they're an aspiring artist, to head to our website, follow us on Instagram, sign up to our newsletter. Like, we're really trying to build an environment and a community there where people have access to resources, information, education, where we're doing storytelling around what it is we actually do all day, how to do the thing, how to create opportunities, how to start your journey. So that's step one. Step two, as an aspiring artist, like, we have submission portals on our website, so people are welcome to go in there, upload their music, send us a message, and submit stuff for consideration. Like, we go through everything that we receive, and we're always absolutely thrilled to get submissions from ambitious young artists.
And we'll go ahead and include that link in our show notes so people can find you and be able to click on that and hopefully further their career. Napper, thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure, Bob. Thank you for having me.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Busan.